In this video, I'll show you how to use leftover sections or scraps in your crazy or freeform quilting project. Don't worry if you don't have any leftovers. I'll show you some techniques that you can use to make the sections for this block. In earlier videos, I went over some types of piecing used in crazy or freeform quilting, such as making strips or fans, or starting in the center and moving out. All of these techniques can be used individually or together. I think choosing fabric for freeform quilting or crazy quilting is fun. You may have heard that it's important to have lights, mediums, and dark, but in crazy quilting, you get to make up the rules. If you want all solids, that's okay. If you want to mix different colors or theme prints, it's okay. Here's a quilt top made with all light fabric. It was difficult to find fabric of all the same value, so don't forget that most of the fabric that you have has two sides. In crazy quilting, you're not going to notice a difference. Let me show you what some of these leftover pieces look like. I've used the backs of the fabric in almost all of these blocks. To get started, you'll need to decide on the size of your final piece. Make sure that all your fabric has been pressed. I like to have strips and fabric sections ready to go. I rarely have a plan before I start. These are sections that were cut from earlier projects in this video series. If you don't have any scraps like this, you can make your own. I've cut some strips and then sewn them together. They don't have to be perfect, and I can cut them off in sections for my block. So this section's pretty small. Let's see, let's try to make this a little bit wider. Maybe I want a wedge like this. I also like to use what I call wonky blocks. This is my free-form version of a 9 patch. I could use a regular 9 patch that just didn't quite make it into a quilt. And you can see I've cut this apart. I could use this section or this one or both of them in my piecing. You're free to use many different techniques to add interest to your block. So if you don't have any sections already sewn together, you might want to try one of these methods. So now I'm ready to start putting sections together. These hints that I've been using still hold true for sewing sections together. No matter which techniques or scraps that I decide to use, I'm focusing on straight line sewing, so I need at least one straight edge to follow. Start with this piece. I already have a straight edge where I cut off from earlier. Here's another piece. I can put those two together. This one also has a fairly straight edge. Just to make the first piecing easy, let's put those two together, and I'm going to take this over to my sewing machine. I'll be using a regular stitch length with red threads so you can see, but you'll want to use a neutral color thread. The edge of my pressure foot will follow along this straight edge. This will be my seam allowance, and it's going to vary depending on the width of your pressure foot. I notice there's this big scrap that's going to get in the way, so let me cut that off to make it just a little bit easier when I feed these in. I like to use what I call a feeder or a leader, a little scrap of fabric to get things started. I'll just push that right up there. And I'm following this straight edge with my pressure foot. I just happen to have a 1/4 inch pressure foot on my machine, but it can be any size out here. I notice that this seam is kind of getting out of place, so let me push that under. I'll take this to the ironing board and press this seam. I'm ready to add the next piece or section to this. I've got a lot going on here, so maybe instead of adding a section now, I'll just add a strip. Since I'm trying to get away from all this busyness, I'll add solid color strip. And let's see, I could put it over here or here. I don't like this stuff up on the top there. It's just this little piece. It might get in the way. So let me chop that off. Okay. I'll take this, put right sides together, and stitch that line. Here's my pressed piece. I'm just checking to see how much more I'm going to need to add, and I need a little bit more. I'd like to put one of these strip sets in, but I need to go along the line here. So I think if I sewed two of these sections together first, and then I could add it to that. So let me show you what that looks like. I've sewn these two together, and then I sewed it to this strip, pressed, and I need to make sure that I trim this excess out of here. Should always try to trim whenever possible. I could cut this with my scissors, but I find it easiest to do with my rotary cutter. I can either add a piece over here, over here. Let's see, I've got this piece. Is that gonna look okay there? Well, let's try it. I'm gonna cut this piece. So here's my straight edge right there. This little piece is probably gonna get in the way, so I'll move this up a little. Let's get that off right now. Put right sides together. I always want this piece to be a little bit bigger on either end. As you can see, I've got some extra sticking out. I need to make sure that everything's covered. So let's look down here. Let's pull it back just a little. I can take this over to my sewing machine and sew this on. I've sewn this, pressed this, and trimmed that extra out of the seam. I'm ready to check. Still not quite big enough to go on here. Maybe if I get a section over here. I went, sewed that wonky 9 patch onto this section to get that straight edge. And I think what I'll do is I'll just add it. Let's try it like that, maybe. Yeah, that looks like it might be pretty close. And if I need to do something in the corner here, on one of the corners, I'll just trim that. If I want to, I could cut this edge here. Let me get a straight edge. There. Take this over to the sewing machine and see what I come up with. I've sewn that last piece on. I like to take a frame and look to see where would I want to add a piece. Covered everything but this corner here. I think what I'd like to do is maybe put this piece in there and see how that works. Cut this edge off here and then put right sides together. Take this over to the sewing machine and I'll be right back to show you what that looks like. I've sewn this section. Now I'm ready to trim this block. Let me put this in here. This away. I'm ready to trim. I want to make sure you get all this excess off on the outside edge. Here's my completed piece. Hope you've enjoyed this series about freeform or crazy quilting. Please leave a comment and let us know what other techniques you would like to learn about. Thank you for visiting LearnHowToQuilt.com.